The champagne flute in my hand felt like a prop, thin-stemmed, crystalline, filled with liquid that cost more per ounce than the steel-toed boots currently making discreet scuff marks on the marble floor of the Apex Gallery. Around me, the air hummed with a very specific frequency of success. The low thrum of tailored wool, the sharp clink of good glassware, the laughter that was more punctuation than joy. It was the sound of the deal closing, the triumphant end-of-reel celebration for the merger of Sterling Dynamics and Veritech Industries. And my boyfriend of 2 years, Liam Sterling, heir apparent and freshly minted Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations, was its golden-haired, blue-eyed epicenter. I stood by a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city's glittering skyline, a vantage point that usually made me feel like I was part of the engine below, not a spectator in the penthouse. I wore the dress Liam's personal shopper had sent over, a sheath of midnight blue silk that felt alien against my skin, which was more accustomed to the coarse weave of work shirts and the rasp of safety harnesses. My hands, resting on the cool glass, were a dead giveaway. Short, clean nails, but undeniably strong, with a network of faint scars and calluses no salon treatment could fully erase. Hands that could read the grain of wood, calibrate a laser level, and identify a compromised beam by touch. "There you are, hiding." Liam's voice, smooth as single malt, cut through my thoughts. He slid an arm around my waist, his touch proprietary. He smelled of citrusy cologne and victory. "Admiring the view? It's ours now, you know. Or it will be." I forced a smile, turning into him. "It's impressive. You must be thrilled." "Thrilled is an understatement, Elle." His eyes, the color of a shallow tropical sea, scanned the room, cataloging important faces. "This is the launch pad. 5 years, Dad retires, and this," he gestured with his own champagne flute, encompassing the gallery, the merger, the skyline, "this is the foundation of my legacy. No more son of." He took a sip, his gaze finally settling on me. "You clean up nicely, by the way. That dress is a statement." "What statement?" I wanted to ask. "That I can play the part?" Instead, I said, "Thanks. The shoes are killing me." He laughed, a bright, dismissive sound. "Beauty is pain, darling. A small price to pay." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "Just try to mingle a bit more, okay? The Veritech folks are a bit old school. Talk about, I don't know, art. The pieces here are insured for millions. Or the canapes. Say something clever about the truffle oil." A cold knot formed in my stomach. The condescension was a familiar taste, but tonight it was laced with a new performative edge. I was a project, and tonight was a live demonstration of his progress. See, even the rough-edged girlfriend can be polished. "Right, truffle oil," I said, flatly. He either missed my tone or chose to ignore it, already waving over a trio of older men in impeccably cut suits. "Charles, gentlemen, have you met my Eleanor?" The next hour was a masterclass in subtle degradation. I was introduced as my Eleanor who keeps me grounded. Code for not in your world. I was asked what I did, and when I said, "I work in construction," the polite frozen smiles were immediate. One of the Veritech VPs, a man with a face like a clenched fist, said, "Ah, a hands-on person. Admirable." The way he said hands-on made it sound like a congenital disease. Liam would chuckle, squeezing my shoulder. "She's fantastic with her hands. Built us a bookshelf last year. Surprising, really." Every interaction was a tiny paper cut. He was my charming eccentricity, his touch of real-world authenticity in a bubble of finance and leverage. I retreated to the periphery again, my champagne warm and flat. I watched him work the room. He was in his element, anecdotes delivered with perfect timing, a confident hand on a shoulder, the easy laugh that drew people in, the golden boy, the heir, and I was the slightly embarrassing, beloved pet he'd brought to the party. My phone vibrated in the tiny beaded clutch that matched the damn dress, a text from Maya, my site foreman and best friend. "How's the lion's den? Are you holding up, or do I need to stage a structural emergency to extract you?" A real smile touched my lips for the first time all evening. "Me. It's educational. The structural integrity here is based entirely on ego and collateral. I'm fine. Send pics of the north elevation progress." A moment later, 3 photos appeared. The skeleton of the new community arts center in the Ravenswood district was taking shape, steel I-beams etched against a twilight sky. My site, my real work, the project I'd fought the city council for, funded through a labyrinth of grants and my own capital, channeled through layers of holding companies and trusts so dense even forensic accountants got headaches. To the world, and to Liam, I was Eleanor Shaw, freelance construction project assistant, taking on odd jobs to make ends meet while I figured things out. It was a mask, carefully crafted and comfortably worn. I'd built it after my parents died. They weren't just wealthy, they were old money, the kind that preferred anonymity and quiet influence. Their deaths in a private plane crash left me, at 24, the sole beneficiary of the Shaw Trust, an entity so vast and discreet it made Sterling Dynamics look like a lemonade stand. I'd been groomed for boardrooms and charity galas, but their death cracked something open in me. I saw the hollow core of that life, the performative philanthropy, the sterile relationships, the constant low-grade anxiety of maintaining an image. I ran. I sold the empty Fifth Avenue apartment, dissolved my public social footprint, and used a fraction of the trust's interest to enroll in trade school. I learned to build things I could touch, things that lasted. The rest of the money? It became a tool, a silent engine for change in neighborhoods the Liams of the world never saw. I funded clinics, bought up decaying housing blocks to renovate and rent affordably, backed green tech startups, all anonymously, all through the Persephone Foundation, a philanthropic ghost. Liam had been a distraction. Handsome, energetic, uncomplicated in his ambitions. He saw a pretty, somewhat lost girl with calloused hands and a vague past, and he decided to reshape me. I let him, because it was easier than explaining, and because part of me was morbidly fascinated by the view from inside his bubble. I'd told him my parents were academics who died leaving me some insurance money, all gone now. He'd patted my hand, said, "We'll build our own future," and saw my modest apartment and my toolbox as a challenge to be overcome. The party was reaching its peak. Liam was holding court near the center of the room, flushed with success and champagne. I saw him throw his head back and laugh at something, the picture of youthful conquest. Then his eyes scanned the room, found me lurking by a dramatic sculpture that looked like a car crash. He waved me over. Reluctantly, I navigated through the crowd. As I reached the inner circle, a man I recognized as Jonathan Veritek, the patriarch of the other merging company, was holding forth. And that's the difference between legacy and luck. Legacy is built, it's sweat and vision. It's not handed to you. He was looking pointedly at a younger man, presumably his son, who looked bored. Liam, eager to align himself with the sweat and vision narrative, jumped in. "Couldn't agree more, Jonathan. That's why I have such respect for people who aren't afraid of real work." He pulled me against his side, a living exhibit. "Take my Ellie here. No silver spoon for her. She's out there every day, literally building the city with her hands. Isn't that right, darling?" The group's attention swung to me. Veritek's gaze was appraising, faintly incredulous. "It's honest work," I said quietly. "Honest," Liam boomed, too loud. The champagne was talking now. "That's one word for it. I tell her, 'Ellie, you've got more potential than swinging a hammer,' but she's stubborn. She likes getting dirty. It's cute, really. A bit of a fantasy, playing tradesperson. But we all have our hobbies, right?" The air left my lungs. The paper cuts were now a blade, twisted in public. Playing tradesperson? A hobby? A titter of laughter went through his sycophants. One woman in a severe black dress smirked into her glass. My face flamed, but a deeper, colder place inside me went still. This was the unmasking, but not the one he thought. Liam, mistaking my silence for hurt feelings, plowed on, his tone turning faux philosophical. "It's a lesson, honestly. You see someone like Ellie, no real career trajectory, no assets to speak of, just getting by, and it makes you appreciate the weight of true responsibility, the burden of building something that lasts, not just nailing boards together for a paycheck." He squeezed me again. "No offense, sweetheart. You know I adore you. But this," he gestured grandly at the gallery, the merger, the skyline. "This is the future. This is permanence." The elevator's descent from the Apex Gallery was a 60-story plunge into a new kind of silence. Not the dead quiet of shock I'd left behind, but the resonant, humming quiet of a decision made. The polished brass doors reflected a fragmented version of me, the midnight blue silk now a costume from a play that had just closed on opening night. My face in the distorted metal looked pale, but my eyes, those damned Shaw eyes my mother always said held the calm of a deep lake, were steady. The cool night air of the city plaza hit me like a physical blessing. I didn't call a car. I walked, the ridiculous heels clicking a defiant tattoo on the pavement. With each step, the constriction in my chest loosened. The weight of Liam's arm, his expectations, his condescension sloughed off like old skin. I felt terrifyingly light. Half a block away, in the shadow of a neoclassical bank building, I stopped. I reached into the beaded clutch, past the useless lipstick and the invitation, and pulled out a small, battered burner phone, a relic from my first days of anonymity, a tether to my other life. I powered it on and dialed a number from memory. It rang once. Persephone. The voice on the other end was female, middle-aged, crisp and devoid of any identifiable accent. It was the voice of my gatekeeper, my fixer, the administrator of the ghost. Her name was Alistair, and she had been my parents' most trusted advisor. Now she was mine. "It's done," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, clearer, older. A pause. Alistair was not one for superfluous questions. Parameters. Full disengagement. Liam Sterling. Sterling Dynamics. Social, financial, all channels. Effective immediately. He is to become a non-entity. I leaned against the cold stone of the bank, watching the traffic lights paint the wet streets in streaks of red and green. "And initiate the Ravenswood media push, the full package. I want the topping out ceremony coverage to saturate the local feeds by morning." "Understood." I could hear the faint tap of keys. The Veritech-Sterling merger closed at 4:02 p.m. today. Their liquidity event is scheduled for Q3. Your standing order to short their combined supply chain subsidiaries is now active. A grim smile touched my lips. Of course. Months ago, bored during one of Liam's endless monologues about market synergies, I'd had Alistair run a deep analysis. The merger was a facade, a debt-fueled gambit to inflate stock prices. Their key suppliers were vulnerable. I'd placed a quiet, massive bet against them, a bet that would now pay off handsomely just as their public celebration began. Good, I said. And Alistair, my identity, the Shaw Trust. It's time to pull back the first curtain. A longer pause this time. Eleanor, that is a significant pivot. The anonymity has been a strategic shield. It's also been a cage. I'm done hiding in plain sight. I want the Ravenswood Center publicly linked to me, not just as a donor, as the founder, the architect. Let's start with a profile in the Chronicle's Sunday magazine. Philanthropist and developer Eleanor Shaw breaks ground on a new model. I could almost see her raised eyebrow through the phone. I know, but the game has changed. He mocked the builder. I'm going to show him the architect. I'll have a draft brief for your review by 8 a.m., she said, her tone betraying no surprise, only efficient recalibration. Your assets at the apartment? I'm not going back there. The thought of the sleek, minimalist loft Liam had helped me decorate, a space that reflected his taste, not mine, made my skin crawl. Send a team. I want everything that isn't mine or isn't essential removed. Pack the rest. I'll be at the Ravenswood site office. It will be done. A final tap of keys. Welcome back, Eleanor. The line went dead. Welcome back. Not to the heiress's gilded cage, but to the command center of my own life. I hailed a cab. Ravenswood District, corner of 7th and Ash, I told the driver, slipping off the torture device heels and relishing the feel of the cab's gritty carpet under my stockinged feet. As the city blurred past, my other phone, the Eleanor phone, began to vibrate. Liam. I watched his name flash on the screen, once, twice, 3 times. Then the texts started. Elle, where the hell did you go? That was incredibly dramatic and inappropriate. You embarrassed me in front of Veritech. We need to talk. Call me. This isn't funny. My father is asking questions. What was that about the Persephone Foundation? I thumbed the phone to silent and watched the bright lights of downtown give way to the grittier, more vibrant streets of Ravenswood. Here, the buildings were lower. The neon was for bodegas and dive bars, not luxury brands. Life pulsed on the sidewalks. This was my city, too. The one I was building in, not just looking down on. The site was a beacon of ordered activity even at night. Security lights bathed the skeletal structure of the Community Arts Center in a sterile white glow. The crane stood sentinel against the night sky. Maya's trailer, a rugged extended site office, was lit from within. Maya was waiting, leaning against the doorframe, a steaming mug in each hand. She was in her usual uniform, Carhartts, a thermal shirt, her dark hair tucked under a beanie. She took one look at my dress, my bare feet, and the expression on my face, and held out a mug. So, extraction successful, I see. You look like you just walked through a wall. More like dismantled one, I said, accepting the coffee. It was strong and bitter. Perfect. Inside, the trailer was warm, cluttered with blueprints, sample boards, and the familiar, comforting smell of coffee, dust, and ambition. I sank into my swivel chair, the metal groaning in protest. Tell me everything, Maya said, perching on the edge of the desk. I did. I spared no detail. The condescension, the public mockery, the final scalding words I'd left him with. Maya listened, her face a storm cloud. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. The arrogant prick. I knew he was a trophy-hunting douchebag, but that was cinematic. She shook her head. And you told him about Persephone? About you? I gave him the first clue. Let him chase it. He won't believe it, not at first. He'll think I'm lying, having a breakdown. I took a long swallow of coffee. The truth will hurt more when he has to dig for it. Maya's grin was feral. I like this side of you, the fuck you side. It's got good bones. She nodded towards the site. We're ready for tomorrow. The beam is signed by every kid from the after-school program. The mayor's office confirmed. Local press is sniffing around thanks to your mysterious press release about a major philanthropic reveal. Good, I said, walking to the window overlooking the site. My site. In the harsh light, I could see the signatures scrawled on the final painted white steel I-beam waiting to be hoisted. Childish handwriting, hopeful messages. This was permanence. This was legacy. Not a line on a stock ticker, but a place where lives would intersect, where art would be made, where a neighborhood's heart would beat stronger. I'm not going back to the apartment, I said. I'll bunk here tonight. Have the crew bring a cot. Maya didn't argue. She just nodded. I'll have someone bring your gear from storage. I kept a locker here with real clothes, broken-in jeans, work boots, flannel, my armor. As she left to make arrangements, the burner phone buzzed. A text from Alistair. A. Initial disengagement protocols complete. Social media ties severed. Financial holds placed on all joint access accounts minimal. His inquiries into Persephone have begun. He is currently at the gallery bar attempting to explain the situation to his father. Stress levels elevated. I allowed myself a moment of cold satisfaction. Let him explain. Let him try to logic away the look in my eyes, the certainty in my voice. I changed out of the silk prison, the fabric slithering to the floor in a heap. I pulled on soft, worn jeans, a thermal shirt, and thick wool socks. The transformation was instantaneous and profound. This was me, Eleanor Shaw, builder. Heiress to a fortune, yes, but more importantly, heir to my own resolve. Sleep was a fleeting thing, caught in fits and starts on the narrow cot. My mind raced with logistics, with the looming media profile, with the delicious, terrifying prospect of being truly seen. But beneath the anxiety was a solid core of rightness. For 2 years, I'd been pouring the foundation of this moment, both literally at Ravenswood and figuratively in the shadow world of finance and philanthropy. The concrete had set. The structure was sound. Dawn came, painting the steel frame in shades of rose and gold. The crew began to arrive, their boots crunching on gravel, their voices a quiet rumble. There was a different energy today, a festive, focused tension. The topping out ceremony was a sacred rite in construction, a celebration of the skeleton's completion. By 10 a.m., the site was buzzing. City officials in overcoats stood awkwardly on plywood sheets. Community leaders, artists from the neighborhood, and a swarm of children from the local school milled around, their eyes wide at the scale of the structure. The world didn't just tilt for Liam Sterling, it executed a full, high-velocity barrel roll. In the 48 hours following the Ravenswood popping out ceremony, the carefully curated reality he inhabited cracked open like a fault line. I learned this not from him. His calls and texts had progressed from furious to pleading to a stunned, ominous silence, but from the business sections, the gossip feeds, and Alastair's cool, precise briefings. Briefing Note A, Media Narrative. The Chronicle's Sunday profile, the Shaw heir from obscurity to community cornerstone, landed with the force of a controlled detonation. It wasn't a hatchet job. It was worse. It was a respectful, detailed unveiling. It featured photos of me at 16 receiving an architectural design award my parents had discreetly hushed up. It quoted Arthur Driscoll gushing about my innate structural intelligence. It laid out, in dry financial terms, the scope of the Persephone Foundation's holdings, the green energy portfolios, the affordable housing trusts, the silent stakes in half a dozen tech unicorns. It positioned my construction work not as a quirky hobby, but as a philosophical choice, hands-on philanthropy. The takeaway was clear. Eleanor Shaw wasn't a gold digger or a hysteric. She was a dormant titan who had chosen to wake up. Briefing Note B, Financial Ripples. The markets, always sniffing for blood, reacted to my veiled threat about Sterling Veritech's supply chain. Analysts, now armed with the Shaw name as a credibility anchor, began issuing cautious notes. The short positions Alastair had placed began to tick upward. More damagingly, 2 of Persephone's long-term investment funds quietly divested from Sterling Dynamics' key logistics partner, citing newly assessed ESG risks. It was a pinprick to a giant, but it left a mark, and in the world of high finance, a mark is an invitation for others to strike. Briefing Note C, Social Capital. The guest list for the upcoming Persephone Foundation Gala, an annual notoriously exclusive event usually covered in a tiny column on page 6 of the Society section, was accidentally leaked. My name was listed as host and chair. The RSVP list read like a who's who of the very world Liam was desperate to dominate. Old money dynasties, tech billionaires with a conscience, celebrated artists and policymakers. The invitations had gone out weeks ago, but now the press noted that Charles and Liam Sterling's invitations were not renewed, a social death sentence. I absorbed all of this from the epicenter of the storm, which was paradoxically a place of profound peace, my new temporary home. I hadn't gone back to the apartment. Using a shell company, Alastair had secured a penthouse loft in a converted warehouse in the vibrant, messy North Point district. It had raw brick walls, exposed ductwork, and a wall of north-facing windows that flooded the space with clear, honest light. The first thing I'd had delivered was my drafting table, scarred with decades of use, originally my grandfather's. It stood in the center of the main room, a testament to real work. My tools were in a custom rack on the wall. The only luxuries were an obscenely comfortable chair and a state-of-the-art espresso machine. This was a workshop for a mind, not a showroom for a life. I was at that table, deep in the schematics for a proposed micro-hydro system for a Persephone-funded eco-village, when the intercom buzzed. I wasn't expecting anyone. Maya had a key. I walked to the screen. The camera feed showed a familiar figure in the stark concrete lobby. Liam. He looked diminished. The golden tan had a gray undertone. He was unshaven, his usually impeccable hair disheveled. He wore a rumpled Oxford shirt under a coat, no tie. He was staring directly into the camera lens, his expression a ragged compound of anger, confusion, and a desperate, humiliated need. I watched him for a 10 count. The part of me that loved him, or loved the idea of the simple, ambitious life he represented, ached with a dull old pain. But it was a phantom limb. The nerve had been severed at the Apex Gallery. I pressed the talk button. Yes? His head jerked up. Eleanor, let me up. We need to talk, please. There's nothing to talk about, I said calmly into the speaker. Don't do this, his voice cracked, echoing in the empty lobby. You lied to me for 2 years. You played me for a fool. You let me think. He couldn't finish the sentence. You let me think I was the catch. You let me patronize you. I lived my life, I said, my voice calm in the speaker. You made your assumptions. You built a narrative where you were the savior and I was the project. I just didn't correct you. This isn't about assumptions, he shouted, then lowered his voice, aware of the echo. This is about us, what we had. You threw it away over a stupid comment at a party. A cold flame lit in my chest. A stupid comment? You publicly declared me worthless, Liam. You used me as a prop to demonstrate your own superiority to a room full of people whose approval you crave. You didn't see a partner. You saw a charity case. That wasn't a comment. That was a diagnosis, and my prognosis is a full and permanent recovery away from you. He was silent for a moment, breathing heavily. When he spoke again, his tone changed, shifting to wheedling, the one he used on junior partners. Eleanor, look, I was wrong. I was an idiot. The stress of the merger, the champagne. I'm sorry, truly, deeply sorry. Can't we just reset? Think of what we could be now, you and me, Shaw and Sterling. It's a powerhouse combination. We could build empires together, for real. There it was, the pivot. The moment the perceived value of the asset changed, so did the strategy. The mockery was gone, replaced by a voracious calculation. I wasn't Ellie the project anymore. I was Eleanor Shaw, a merger opportunity. The last vestige of any feeling evaporated. No, Liam, we couldn't, because you see powerhouse. I see conflict of interest. You see empires. I see communities. We don't speak the same language. Now, please leave. My security will escort you out if you don't. I released the talk button, cutting off his sputtered response. I watched on the monitor as he stood there, fists clenched, looking for a moment like he might punch the sleek concrete wall. Then his shoulders slumped. He turned and walked out of the frame, a prince exiled from a kingdom he never really understood. I returned to my drafting table, but the lines on the vellum blurred. The confrontation left a residue. It was necessary, but it was also draining. My phone buzzed. A different line. Alistair. He's left the building, she said without preamble. He proceeded directly to the offices of Clayton and Rye. Corporate litigators. Expensive, aggressive. He's going to sue? Unclear. Likely exploring options. Defamation, interference with prospective economic advantage, perhaps even claiming fraudulent misrepresentation in your personal relationship. It's a fishing expedition, a show of force for his father's benefit. They have no standing. Let them fish, I said, but have our people ready. And send everything we have on Sterling Dynamics bid rigging on the city's West Terminal project to the Chronicle's investigative desk, anonymously. The materials are prepped and ready for your final authorization. Authorized. I hung up. The game was ugly, but he had chosen the field. If he wanted a war of attrition, I had deeper trenches and longer supply lines. The next morning, the war went hot in an unexpected quarter. I was reviewing masonry samples for the Ravenswood Center's exterior when Maya burst into the site office with her tablet held out like a shield. You need to see this. On the screen was a post from Celeste Veritek's verified social media account. Celeste was Jonathan Veritek's daughter, a sharp, notoriously acid society columnist who had been at the merger party. She'd been one of the smirking faces in the crowd. The post was a long-form essay, titled The Gilded Tool Belt on Performance, Poverty, and the Patronage of the Poor. It was a masterpiece of venomous, highbrow character assassination. It didn't name me, but the references were crystalline. It spoke of a recent trend of trust fund revolutionaries who dabble in manual labor as a form of slum tourism, who use the gritty aesthetic of real work to launder their family's bored wealth into social capital. It mocked the carefully curated calluses and the designer work boots. It concluded, there is nothing more insulting to the people who actually build our world than to be used as a prop in someone else's journey of self-discovery. Actual authenticity cannot be purchased at a salvage yard or performed on a construction site. It is earned in the silent, unglamorous grind of necessity. It was clever. It hit at the most vulnerable part of my new narrative, the accusation of inauthenticity. The comments were a battleground. Some defended me, citing the tangible result. The Veritek dinner was not held in a gallery or a penthouse, but in the oak-paneled, book-lined dining room of Jonathan Veritek's townhouse, a Gilded Age relic that smelled of beeswax, old money, and subtle intimidation. It was a room designed for decisions, not decoration. The table was a vast slab of polished mahogany, set for 10. The other guests were a carefully curated mix, a city comptrolling with mayoral ambitions, a stoic union president whose endorsement was a political lifeline, a celebrated but commercially struggling architect, and a few Veritek board members whose faces were monuments to fiduciary solemnity. I was the outlier, the wild card, the structural stress they were gathered to assess. I wore not a cocktail dress, but a tailored, deep green pantsuit of raw silk, its simplicity a statement of its own. My hair was pulled back in a severe knot. The only jewelry was my mother's simple platinum watch. I looked like what I was, a professional coming to a negotiation. Jonathan Veritek stood at the head of the table, a patriarch in his natural habitat. He was in his late 60s, with the build of a former athlete gone to seed, and eyes like chips of glacial ice. He greeted me with a handshake that was neither warm nor cold, merely an assessment of grip strength. Ms. Shaw, a pleasure to finally meet the architect of so much recent discussion. His voice was gravel wrapped in velvet. Mr. Veritek, thank you for the invitation. Your home is remarkable. I let my gaze travel over the intricate plasterwork of the ceiling. Late 19th century? The load-bearing walls must be 3 feet thick. A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, crossed his face. He'd expected an heiress, maybe a crusader. He hadn't expected someone who could appraise his walls. Indeed, built to last, unlike so much of today's work. He gestured for me to take a seat to his right, the ambiguous place of honor. Dinner was a silent, multi-course parade. The conversation was a careful minuet around the edges of the real topic. The comptroller, a man named Higgins, talked about fiscal responsibility in public works. The union president, O'Malley, grunted about quality jobs. The architect, a woman named Lynn, spoke wistfully of integrating beauty and function. I listened, ate the perfect seared scallop, and waited. It was over the venison, as a server poured a glass of the Brunello Alistair had noted, that Veritek finally turned the screws. Your Ravenswood project is ambitious, Ms. Shaw, he began, swirling the blood-dark wine. A community arts center, a noble sentiment. But sentiment is a poor foundation. The economics are questionable. You've foregone premium leasing space for a clinic and classrooms. Your funding model relies on your foundation's largesse. It's not a replicable model. It's a very expensive piece of performance art. All eyes were on me. This was the test. Would I get defensive, emotional? I set my fork down. You're correct, Mr. Veritek. It's not a model designed to maximize shareholder return in the next quarter. It's designed to maximize community resilience over the next half-century. The clinic will reduce city emergency room burdens. The apprenticeship program will create a pipeline of skilled labor, addressing the shortage your own developments complain about. The arts programming has been linked to reduced crime rates and increased property values in adjacent blocks. I took a sip of water. It's not performance art, it's systems engineering. The return on investment is social and long-term, but it is calculable. My foundation has done the math. Higgins, the comptroller, leaned forward, interested. Reduced ER burdens have a hard dollar value. Can you share that projection? Before I could answer, Veritek cut in. Projections are fantasies. Cash flow is reality. Your foundation, Ms. Shaw, is a formidable entity, but even the deepest pockets have a bottom. Diversion of capital into non-producing assets is a strategic risk. He leaned back, his gaze piercing. My daughter Celeste wrote a rather provocative piece recently. She questioned the authenticity of your sudden passion for the working class. Having spent 2 years dating my soon-to-be former nephew-in-law while hiding your true circumstances, one can see her point. It does seem like a narrative constructed for effect. The air froze. The other guests studied their plates. It was a brutal public evisceration, cloaked in polite language. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, but I kept my voice level, using the calm I reserved for dealing with incompetent inspectors or hostile subcontractors. My relationship with Liam Sterling was a personal error of judgment, one I've ended. It has no bearing on the viability of a community center or the decades of work my family's wealth has done, anonymously, in sectors you and your peers have consistently ignored. I met his gaze. As for authenticity, Mr. Veritek, I don't claim to speak for the working class. I employ them. I learn from them. I build with them. Can you say the same? Or do you just build for them, and usually over their objections? O'Malley, the union man, let out a soft "huh" that might have been a suppressed laugh. Veritek's jaw tightened. I build what the market demands, efficiently, profitably. That is how cities grow. Is it? I asked, genuinely curious. Or is it how wealth concentrates? Your merger with Sterling, congratulations by the way, creates an entity that controls what? Nearly 40% of the city's major commercial development? That's not a market. That's a monopoly in the making. And monopolies are notoriously inefficient for everyone but the monopolist. I switched the battlefield, from her character to his business. Higgins's eyes widened. Antitrust was a word that made comptrollers very nervous. Veritek's smile was thin and dangerous. A bold accusation from someone whose own foundation is a rather opaque monopoly on conscience. Transparency is a choice, I said. I reached into the slim portfolio I'd brought and laid a single sheet of paper on the table next to my plate. It was a list of Persephone's direct investments in the city, with dollar amounts and job creation figures. We choose to be transparent about our impact. Perhaps you'd like to share a similar breakdown for the Veritek-Sterling merger's projected benefits for the city's existing residents, not just its new tenants. It was a checkmate move. He had no such breakdown. Their projections were all about investor returns and square footage. The silence stretched. The architect, Lynn, was looking at me with something like awe. The board members looked deeply uncomfortable. Veritek stared at the paper as if it were a live snake. Then he looked up at me, and the mask of the patrician host fell away completely. In its place was the raw, competitive fury of a man who saw a threat to his kingdom. You are playing a very dangerous game, young woman. You have wealth, but you lack the structure, the alliances, the experience to wield it in this arena. You will be chewed up and spat out." It was the truth, naked and ugly. The dinner was a farce. This was the real meeting. "Experience," I repeated. "You mean the experience of leveraging municipal bonds for private gain? The experience of backroom zoning changes? The experience of using offshore entities in mineral zones to offset losses?" I said the last part softly, almost kindly. The color drained from Veritek's face. The offshore holdings, Alistair's intelligence, he hadn't thought I could know or would dare to use. I stood up. "Thank you for dinner, Mr. Veritek. It was illuminating. I have another engagement to prepare for." I nodded to the stunned table. "Gentlemen, Ms. Lin, I suspect our paths will cross again, preferably over a blueprint, not a battle map." I walked out of the dining room, my back straight, the echo of my heels on the parquet the only sound. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the tectonic plates shifting in that room. The cold night air was a shock. My hands were trembling, but with adrenaline, not fear. I had faced the dragon in its lair, and I hadn't been eaten. I'd pull the scale. My phone buzzed as my car pulled up. "Alistair." "Well?" Her voice was as ever unflappable. "I threatened him. I implied I knew about his offshore issues. The dinner is over. I left." A satisfied hum. "Good. Higgins contacted his aide the moment you left the room. He wants a meeting with you about public-private partnership models. O'Malley just texted his second asking for an introduction to your apprenticeship program director." So the seeds were sown. Not all the giants were on one side. "The gala is tomorrow," I said, sliding into the back seat. "Is everything ready?" "The final security sweep is complete. The guest list is locked. The press list has been vetted. Your speech is loaded on the teleprompter. And..." The gala's afterglow was a tangible thing. It lingered in the flood of interview requests on Alistair's desk, in the secure server logs showing a spike in serious investment inquiries for Persephone's next phase projects, and in the quiet, settled confidence that now felt like my native air. The world had recalibrated its understanding of Eleanor Shaw. I was no longer a specter at the feast or a punchline. I was a player, one with an unconventional playbook and the capital to back it up. The Ravenswood Community Arts Center opened its doors 6 weeks later, not with another black tie event, but with a neighborhood block party. The streets were closed, filled with music from local bands, food from immigrant-run vendors, and the shrieks of children trying out the new publicly funded playground adjacent to the building. The ribbon cutting wasn't performed by the mayor or a celebrity, but by the youngest child in the after-school program and the oldest resident of the Ravenswood district, a woman who'd lived there for 89 years. I stood to the side, my hands in the pockets of my work jacket, watching people stream into the bright, airy lobby, their faces alight with curiosity and ownership. This was the return on investment, the human one. Liam Sterling had receded to a distant toxic smudge on the horizon. The defection of his lawyers had been followed by a cascade of professional humiliations. The short positions against the Sterling Veritek supply chain had triggered a minor crisis of confidence, forcing a costly restructuring. His father, Charles, was rumored to be furious, blaming Liam's personal indiscretions for drawing negative attention. Liam had been quietly reassigned to a peripheral division focusing on overseas asset management, a polite exile. I'd heard through the ever-efficient gossip mill that he'd sold the sleek downtown loft and moved to a nondescript apartment in a neighborhood he would have once mocked. Celeste Veritek's column had gone mysteriously quiet. The Veritek Foundation's dinner invitations no longer commanded the same fear. The old guard was still there, but the ground had subtly shifted beneath their polished shoes. My life found its new rhythm. Mornings were often at the Ravenswood Center, not as a benefactor, but as a participant. I taught a weekly informal workshop on basic carpentry and home repair for single parents. The feeling of showing a nervous mother how to safely use a power drill to fix a wobbly shelf was worth more than any stock dividend. Afternoons were split between the Persephone Foundation's offices, a light-filled, collaborative space in a converted factory, and my drafting table at the North Point Loft, where I was designing the next project, a net-zero energy affordable housing complex in a transit desert. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was at my drafting table, deep in the calculations for a shared geothermal loop system, when the intercom buzzed. I glanced at the security feed. Not a delivery person, not Maya. It was a man I didn't recognize. Early 40s, with the weary, intelligent eyes of a journalist who'd seen too many press releases. He held up a badge to the camera. Ben Carter, The Financial Review. I sighed. The media had been persistent but respectful. Carter's publication was serious, heavyweight. Ignoring it would seem petty. I buzzed him up. He entered the loft with a photographer in tow, his eyes immediately taking in the space, the drafting table, the tool wall, the schematics pinned to a vast corkboard, the absence of anything traditionally luxurious. "Miss Shaw, Ben Carter, thanks for your time." His handshake was firm, his assessment quick. "This isn't what I expected." "What did you expect?" I asked, gesturing to the worn leather sofa. "Something more penthouse, less workshop." He sat, pulling out a small recorder. My editor wants a profile, but not the mysterious heiress angle. We've done that. He wants the operator angle, how the Shaw fortune actually works, the mechanics of it. I studied him. He wasn't here for salacious details about Liam. He was here for the blueprint. It was a refreshing change. Ask your questions. For an hour, he did. He asked about the trust's governance, about our investment thesis that weighted social impact alongside financial return. He asked hard questions about scalability, about the risk of my personal involvement creating a single point of failure. He asked about the tension between philanthropy and systemic change. Isn't this just a fancier version of charity, soothing a guilty conscience with targeted generosity while the fundamental structures that create inequality remain untouched? It was the central critique, the one that kept me up at night. Yes and no, I admitted, leaning forward. The clinic in Ravenswood is a band-aid, absolutely. But the apprenticeship program that trains community members to become the clinic's electricians, its HVAC technicians, its future managers, that's changing a structure. It's creating local, dignified capital, both financial and human. We're not just giving fish, we're publicly funding the hatchery, training the fishers, and then helping them own the pond. I tapped the housing complex plans. This project isn't just about affordable units. It's about a resident-owned cooperative model. It's about divorcing shelter from speculative profit. That's a structural attack. Carter's pen flew across his notebook. He was engaged, challenging, but not hostile. When the photographer finished, Carter turned off his recorder. Off the record? I nodded cautiously. You rattled a lot of cages. The Veritex, the Sterlings. That world runs on quiet agreements and unspoken rules. You broke them publicly. They won't forget. I know, I said. They're waiting for you to stumble, for your noble experiment to show a crack, for the heiress to get bored and run off to fund a space hotel or something. Then they'll be waiting a long time, I said quietly. This isn't an experiment for me. It's my life's work. The money is just a tool. The work, I gestured to my hands, the permanent calluses. This is the product, and I believe in it more than I ever believed in a stock ticker. He looked at me for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. I believe you do. That's what makes you dangerous to them. He stood to leave. The piece will run next week. It won't be a puff piece, but it will be fair. After he left, the loft felt too quiet. His warning echoed. They're waiting for you to stumble. The stumble, when it came, was not of my making, but landed squarely in my lap. A week later, Maya stormed into the Persephone offices, her face like thunder. We have a problem, a big one. It wasn't construction-related, it was political. A city councilman, a reliably pro-development vote named Garvey, had suddenly introduced a surprise zoning amendment. It would reclassify a large, dormant industrial sector on the city's south side, a sector where Persephone had quietly assembled options on a few key parcels for our next big project, a mixed-use development centered on a green tech incubator and worker-owned light manufacturing. The amendment would change the zoning from light industrial to high-density commercial leisure, effectively making our planned tech workshops and affordable live-work units impossible. In their place, the rumored bidder was a consortium that included several Sterling Veritech shell companies. Their plan, a casino and luxury outlet mall. It was a blatant, old-fashioned power play. They'd found a crack, a councilman with gambling debts, according to the dossier Alistair had already pulled up on my screen, and they were using it to stab at the heart of my next move. They couldn't touch Ravenswood. It was too public, too beloved, so they were going after the future. Garvey's committee hearing is in 48 hours, Maya said, pacing. If this goes through, we lose the site. More importantly, it sends a message. You can play your little games in one district, but the real city is still ours. Anger, cold and sharp, cut through me. This wasn't business, this was punishment, a message that my occupied space was only granted on their suffrage. We fight, I said, my mind already racing past the anger to the strategy. We mobilize the Ravenswood community. We get the unions O'Malley represents. We get the green tech startups that we've been incubating. We make this a public fight about the city's soul, jobs and innovation versus gambling and fast fashion. It's a committee hearing, Ellie, dry, procedural. They'll out-lobby us in the back rooms. Then we don't play in the back rooms, I said, turning to my computer. Alistair, I need everything on Councilman Garvey's leisure activities, his debts, his creditors. I need it legally actionable and ready for the Chronicle's investigative desk within 6 hours. And I need a list of every donor to his last campaign who is also a Sterling Veritech vendor. Compiling, Alistair's voice came through the speaker, a note of grim approval in her tone. Maya, I continued, call every community leader, every pastor, every teacher from the Ravenswood programs. Tell them the same people who ignored their neighborhood for decades are now trying to steal the future from another one just like it. Get them to that hearing. Fill the chamber. For the next 2 days, we worked in a state of controlled siege. Alistair's information was delivered. The Chronicle ran a devastating, detailed piece the morning of the hearing, linking Garvey's sudden zoning